Welcome to the Cookbook, where we invite guests on to share the ingredients of what has helped make them the successes that they are. All of it, the good, the not so good. You're not going to find anything half-baked here. And our kitchen gets messy sometimes. That's when the fun starts. So come on and join us. Hey everybody, and welcome to another episode of The Cookbook. I'm your host, Iris Goldfeder, and I'm so freaking excited. I know I always say I'm excited about my guests, but I am so freaking excited about my guest today, Mollie Eastman, who used to be, when we met, Mollie McLaughlin, because we met like during COVID, like when COVID hit, and we started doing we met in doing like a video challenge, and Mollie had been doing her podcast and just like so many things. But anyway, so we've been friends for years and we've been trying to get this thing together for like a year, and she's here and I'm so excited. So I'm going to read her bio and bring her on, and I guarantee that you are going to fall as in love with her as I am. So I'm going to read her bio and bring her on. So Mollie Eastman is the creator of Sleep is a Skill and the host of the Sleep is a Skill podcast. Sleep is a Skill is a company that optimizes people's sleep through a unique blend of technology, accountability, and behavioral change. And I will tell you that it changed my life. And we'll talk about that during the show. After navigating insomnia while traveling internationally, she created what she couldn't find, a place to go to learn the skill set of sleep. With a background in behavioral change from the nonverbal group, she became fascinated with chronobiology and its practical application to sleep and our overall experience of life. Knowing the difference between a life with sleep and without, she's now dedicated her life to sharing the forgotten skill set of sleep. In the spirit of that goal, she has created the _2 sleep podcast, written a popular weekly sleep newsletter for over 5 years, partnered with luxury hotels and lifestyle brands. She's fancy, y'all. Coached the world's top poker players. It has appeared on over 150 podcasts, and now we're going to make it 151 or 150 whatever. So without further ado, let's meet Mollie.
Woohoo! Thank you for that. I know it's quite the lengthy lead-in. So thank you for sharing all of that and for having me on. And to your point, for us to be able to have our schedules align and make it all happen, because this is, to your point, been a long time coming. And I'm so, just inspired by how great your podcast is, all the work you've been doing, and for the years that we've known each other and being able to see all these different places and spaces that we've been at in our businesses and beyond. So this is really an honor.
Well, I'm honored that you chose to be on here. So, because I know that you're on like a million other podcasts. So, but it's just so funny because I follow you on Instagram. I'm a lurker because I don't really, comment a lot. Once in a while I'll comment. But I see you with these brands and all this. And I said to Heather, because she calls you Sleep Lady still. She'll call you Sleep Lady. Well, you're Sleep Lady. Nina's Video Lady. Steph is, Vegetable Lady. And Diane is, because she does mindfulness with Diane also. So,
perfect.
So there's like all this stuff. So, so she, now I forgot what the hell I was going to say.
All these ladies around you.
I'm telling you, right? But I told her that you were going to be on, and she was like crazy excited because she was like, "Oh, you're going to be talking to Sleep Lady," and I said yes. So because when I bought my ring, because they're not cheap, and my wife, is the one who holds our pocket strings. Yeah. She was like, "Really?" I'm like, "I got a discount." Because I did, because they were like, "You've been a customer for so long. Sure. Here's a discount." And I'm like, and it does all these things. And now it lights up at night. So my dogs, which I didn't realize. So my dogs are like pawing at my hand. And so it's pretty fun.
Oh my gosh. Well, I know the evolution so certainly to your point, for anyone listening that maybe if you're not tracking or considering tracking, every client we work with has to wear the Oura Ring to participate in our programs at various points. And now sometimes we have them take data vacations if they're getting a little too wrapped up in the data, or maybe want to just kind of take a little bit of a more subjective take on their sleep. That can be, super important at different points as well. But there often is a lot that we can glean from tracking. And I know you've been now tracking for quite some time, so that might be interesting to hear what you've uncovered as well.
Well, I mean, for me, it was really interesting. So first off, so we met 4 years ago, and like you said, our businesses it's been amazing watching you. It's just been,
right back at
that's
you.
what I was going to say. So she saw you on Instagram also, and we said, Mollie's getting bougie. She's like, talking about all these, these brands and everything. So it was just pretty funny. But she's like, Sleep Lady's getting bougie.
Oh, man. Well, and if people know my origin story, coming from I grew up in a trailer and on welfare and all the things. So yeah, the course of my life has been an interesting one. And so that's pretty
so
funny.
Successful.
Yeah. Oh man.
And you married, Blake, the man of your dreams, which was amazing because I remember all of that. And God, you're just
a good one. Yeah.
Yeah. But so, with my sleep, so I started with Mollie 4 years ago because prior to COVID, I hadn't been sleeping at all. Like I would get on our video calls. We would do this thing with Nina, and I would get on the calls and be exhausted. And when COVID hit, I was, sleeping even less because I was so worried about everything that was going on in the world.
Yeah.
And then, finally I said, okay, I want to work with you. So Mollie and I started working together, and she said, you have to get the Aura Ring. So I'm like, what is this Aura Ring thing? And then, you explained about how it tracks sleep. And I got it because I was really committed to doing it. And I got the ring, and then I got my instructions because, you have to go onto the website, you have to fill things out. And then we started, and we would meet, I think weekly or biweekly or something. And we would track all of the different elements of sleep, right? So your heart rate variability, which I wouldn't know what that was, all of it. And when you go through it and you're actually watching, the numbers, it's kind of staggering because you see that, my sleep was at like 40 for the longest time. And I think I remember the first time I hit 80, I wanted to have a party. It was like, whoa, I got a crown,
Yes.
But it really was a lifestyle change. It was, wearing, these things that, I still have because I still
blue blockers.
Yeah. Wear them sometimes and they look cool, but Heather will make fun of me. She's like, really, you're wearing those? And because I can tell now when I'm going to have a good night's sleep and when I'm not.
Yeah, absolutely.
And then I feel, like I know when I need to kind of turn it off. And I'll put those on, and then the dogs freak out. They're like, what does she have on her face? But the point is that when you track your sleep, your life changes because you can see all the different, things that have to do with it. So, well, I mean, let's talk about you. Let's talk about your story.
Yeah.
How you got to, be the sleep lady. So.
Yeah, be the sleep lady. I know it's crazy because the origin story is one of my own troubles with my own sleep. And so what that looked like was, I now think of my life in a 3-part series. I really think of it as before I went through my own kind of sleep breakdown, honestly, the period throughout that, the struggles that brought about, and then thereafter, and actually getting to know myself as someone that could sleep well, reliably. But the first half of that, what that looked like was, and this went back to childhood, my formative years, teenage years, college and beyond. And what this would look like was a lot of labels and narratives with my sleep. So I would say things like, I'm a short sleeper, I'm a night owl, it's in my genes, I'll sleep when I'm dead, all these types of ways of navigating sleep as if it was something that was just fixed and kind of the cards that you're dealt, the hand that you got to play, and you're at the effect of it. And that's kind of how I acted, but not thinking that I needed to look too much at it, because I thought it just was how it was, and that was just my reality. And my behaviors got more kind of pronounced as years went on. And subsequently, my kind of deleterious effects kind of built up. And what that looked like was I was getting anxious more and more often. I got the beginnings of an ulcer. I had shingles in my 20s, a lot of signs that how I'm managing my health and well-being is just not panning out for me. But I'm not correlating the whole time that sleep is a part of this. And it wasn't until it kind of just, knocked me over with this period of insomnia while traveling internationally that everything changed for me, because suddenly I just couldn't, I was now experiencing life without proper sleep and the sense that I had any say over it. This was very disempowering, to say the least. And not only that, it truly was a time where I started to feel like I'm losing my mind. Like I can't function like this. This is very scary. And a sense of, am I stuck like this? Is it always going to be like this now? Which turns out to be kind of a common concern for people once they start navigating some of this insomnia. Chronic insomnia is this fear that something happened and now this is my new reality indefinitely. And so
insomnia is scary, because when I had it, it was just like, am I ever going to sleep again? And what happens if I don't sleep? Yeah.
Right. Yeah. The fear, and then you spiral, and then now that's keeping you up. And I mean, I remember at some of its worst, like the sun would be setting and then my heart would start racing and I would start getting so fearful of another night without sleep, and like a sense of, I can't keep doing this, and there's the fear, and it would mount and mount. So finally I went to the doctors, and this was in Croatia, and I left with sleeping pills. And in that moment, realizing that, okay, if I am going to take this, if I'm going to do anything about this, if I'm going to solve this problem, it appears that I'm going to need to figure this out on my own. Now, I will call out that that is not supposed to be the first line treatment. It is supposed to be, at least in the United States, it's supposed to be that you are informed about CBTI, cognitive behavioral therapy for insomnia. Just so happened that I was not informed about that. However, I did go down the path of CBTI, but unfortunately for me, there are some people that don't respond particularly well to it, and I was one of those people.
Can you explain what that is? Because
the audience
probably doesn't know.
Yeah, so CBTI, cognitive behavioral therapy for insomnia, is it's a protocol and a set of things that you can do to support your sleep. It's got great efficacy behind it. There are different CBTI therapists that can help facilitate this for you, where you'll look at things like kind of cognitive restructuring. So really questioning and looking at those thoughts that are coming up, like, oh, I'm never going to sleep again. I'm stuck like this. I'm not going to be able to do anything tomorrow, or whatever these thoughts are. Then you kind of reframe those and say, are those real? So you kind of do things along those lines. It also looks at things like sleep hygiene. So some of the ways in which you're managing your sleep. Beyond that, you can look at things like sleep restriction, or some might then look at things like sleep compression. So looking at what your average amount of sleep that you're getting, and then you pad it a little bit so that you're starting to retrain yourself to have more efficient sleep if you're dealing with a lot of wake ups or what have you, just that inability to kind of have a full stretch of more uninterrupted sleep. So there's different things that you can do with CBTI. So it is supposed to be the first line approach. However, for many, sadly, we're still seeing very quickly being offered, sleeping pills and things that might have some concerns if we don't have other tools under our belt to address our poor sleep. So for me, when I was given those sleeping pills, it really landed for me like, I got to figure this out. And so I went down the rabbit hole to understand, what does it take to get great sleep? And some of the things that I discovered was beyond just the mental components that might come up in things like CBTI, which can be so helpful, so wonderful. And yet there's also this whole other world that was fascinating for me in this realm of chronobiology, the science of time and how time affects your biology, and circadian rhythm entrainment, how you could actually have a blueprint available to us that aligns with the rhythms of nature to support our sleep-wake cycles. So all of this was just fascinating to me. as I start to, kind of bring about some of these distinctions, and this took time to regain sort of that sleep confidence and trust that like I can indeed get sleep reliably. This took a while, but in the process, once I restored my sleep, not only to how it was before, which as I shared was not that great before, now I'm looking at, oh, wait, it's available to me to be able to optimize my sleep. I didn't even think that was something I could do. And so once that all started happening, my entire experience of life changed. I mean, I used to be someone that would wake up and I would have headaches when I'd wake up in the morning. I would be dragging. I would just be, zombie-like and just trying to get through the day, lots of stimulants and all kinds of things to try to get myself going, and then all kinds of things to try to get myself wound down in the evening. Yep. And the cycle continues. And so once that cycle was interrupted and I got to experience feeling rested in the morning, like my whole experience of life shifted, as well as my mental health. So my emotional regulation, my ability to kind of see the world a bit more clearly really, really changed. And this was a big deal for me. So couldn't stop talking about it. So these kind of small groups start emerging because it was one of the things I felt was missing during this period of time. I remember looking for like almost sleep support groups or like AA for sleep. Why don't we have these things? And I couldn't find those things. So then started kind of creating that just organically because I'd been on so many forums and things to help support my own sleep. And as I started to, heal that, I would share what was working for me. And then, more and more people just started kind of coming along. So slowly what gets created is sleep is a skill. And then from there with courses, podcasts, newsletters, we work in particular now with a lot of high stakes poker players as part of our kind of bread and butter. And I say all that because this all came from one of what felt like one of the lowest periods of my life. And I do believe that for all of us, what is available when our sleep is not working is some real opportunities to uncover what might not be working in the rest of our life and can really serve as a barometer of the workability of our lives. And so it's going to be dynamic. Even if you think, well, my sleep's fine right now, just wait, the hormones shift, loved one dies, something happens. And at some point, most of us are going to experience some difficulty to greater or lesser degrees. And that therein lies an opportunity to kind of respond with knowledge, with building of a skill set so that you have this available to yourself.
Right. And it's funny, my guest yesterday, Al, he just was going through a whole bunch of personal stuff. And he's like, I haven't really been getting good sleep. And I was like, oh my God. So I'm going to introduce you to like via email. Seriously.
Oh, please.
He's been going through a really hard time.
Awful.
But when his podcast ended, I went inside and I started like chuckling to myself. I was like, duh, I have to introduce, Al to Mollie. But it's funny because the whole circadian rhythm thing, I think when we first started working together, I was very not skeptical.
Yeah.
But I was, I told you this, I was like, that's not going to work with me. Like, I know it's not. And you were like, oh my God. And then, so I ordered all the things because when I go all in, right? So I got like the light bulbs and the blue blockers and the sleep masks, which I told Mollie, it's kind of funny. Heather, was like, oh, I'm going to steal that. So she stole my mask and then I had to go order another one. And then the dog ate the mask and then we had to order another one. And Amazon was probably like, why do they keep ordering these masks? But anyway, so, but when I really started paying attention to it and getting up at the same time and going to sleep at the same time, I mean, this stuff really makes a difference. It completely, it changed my life in that it changed my mood. It changed the way that I remember the first night that I slept all the way through without Ambien, without any of the crap that they gave me, right? Like I stopped all of it. And I remember it took 2 days. It took 2 full days of waking up at the same time, putting the glasses on, doing the things, because it was summer when we started working together. And so I had to like kind of intimate evening. And so I did all those things, dimmed the lights. So I had the blue blockers on. Heather, went with it. Thank God I have such a supportive wife. And the second night I slept and I woke up, my alarm went off and I was like, it's 7:30 in the morning. I would get up at 2 and then at 4, right? And then at like 5. And I went to bed at 10:30, I think. And I woke up at 7 or 11, I think it was. And then I woke up at 7:30 and I was like, oh my God. And that was when I went even more all in because then I was like, I remember I told you, I think I texted you. I was like, oh my God, like I slept 8 hours.
Yeah.
That hadn't happened in like 4 years.
And it's so available to us. And I just think it can be so empowering. And of course, for anyone listening, there's going to be nights where certain things happen and, we're not saying it has to be perfect every night at all. And often for many of us, when we're really trying to support our sleep, there can be some solace and importance of prioritizing, some grace and humanity for the fact that sometimes things will come up and not getting too perfectionistic on our sleep, because it's a very common trait with insomnia, is people are wanting to have it be like, okay, I need to have the perfect amount of sleep and the whatever. And yet, oddly, the more we train to have some of that grace and workability in the process of, to your point, then going all in with how much can we align ourselves with these rhythms of nature. And it extends from light, dark, temperature timing, our meal timing, our exercise timing, our thought timing, our drug timing. There's all these timing components that can just help facilitate all of this so that it gets more automated. So in the process of all this and then loosening our grip on wanting to get it right, because that was one of the things I dealt with, was like, oh, I feel like I need to have the perfect sleep or else I'm in trouble or whatever. Oddly, then you start creating a life where you are getting the type of sleep that you're talking about more routinely, and it just kind of falls into place, which is just amazing.
Yeah, and it's an amazing feeling. So for those of you out there who are listening, watching, who are having these issues, you can reach Mollie, and we'll, talk about it towards the end on, how to get hold of Mollie and everything, but it will change your life. I mean, it will 100% change your life because sleep affects everything. Sleep affects our cognitive ability. It affects our mood. It affects if we're driving, right? Yeah. Like our alertness, our, reflex timing. It affects everything. And I just love that. I just look at all of this, and food is like another issue, right? Like I would eat it's so funny because I would always eat at like 11 o'clock at night because I'd be hungry.
Totally.
I'd be like, oh, I'm going to eat like ice cream, or I'll have some chocolate milk. Although milk does help me sleep, even if it's chocolate milk, but I'll have something. And then I'm laying there for another hour.
Right.
Because I was up too long. So now I was hungry. So I ate something. And now, do you want to touch on?
Absolutely. Meal timing is probably we touched on light, dark timing, and that acts as the most powerful circadian cue. So letting our body know what time it is and what to be doing when. And this can help us tremendously with things like our consistency of our cortisol pulse in the morning, our melatonin pulse in the evening and beyond. So it can really help automate some of the workability of waking up at around the same time effortlessly and getting sleepy around the same time in the evening. So that's light, dark. And then some of the next ones that so massively impact our circadian rhythm go into temperature being one of those facets. Underneath that, both ambient and your bodily temperature, and of course being impacted by ambient. But there's other things that impact our body temperature, and one of them is meal timing. So when we eat, it acts as another circadian cue that has a fancy word known as zeitgebers, and zeitgebers are time givers. But just simply, it's telling your body something about the time. And so one of the things that we're starting to find is that it appears that we want to align our meal timing as closely as possible to the rhythms of nature. So what would that look like? Well, basically eating during the time when the light is out as much as we can, and then not going too late, much past that into post sunset and into the late evenings and what have you. Even though it can be a challenge, because we can entrain our stomach in the same way that we can entrain our wake, our sleep, etc. So many of us have entrained ourselves to get hungry at certain times. Like in your example, used to be the same. I used to eat reliably at nights, and I've had it linked up as this calming thing, relaxing. It's like a reward for me after a hard day's work or whatever, things I would say to myself. But not knowing that it was actually setting this whole chain of events. And so one, we know something about the fact that, if we are eating, what is this turning on? Of course, the digestive system, things like the pancreas being turned on, if you will, like an on switch. And what happens when those are turned on, that can impact the ability to turn on other functions that we'd like to have. So most notably, melatonin seems to be impacted and not able to produce in the same way when the body is dealing with digestion. So that lack of our ability to turn on a hormone that prepares you for sleep, melatonin, very different than like an Ambien or something, instead of just like, it's on and now you're passed out. Instead, melatonin is one that kind of is this preparatory process. So it's helping you to downregulate, to calm down the heart rate, to get you in a state that can be conducive to sleep and then keep you asleep. Now, if we're hitting at our ability to produce that, among other things, and warming up the body, which is a counter signal to what we're trying to produce, because one of the things that tells the body that it's time for sleep onset is a marked drop in body temperature. And so if we're not having that, that's just another hurdle that we're giving ourselves. Beyond that, one of the big reasons that sleep has gotten some more press in recent years has been the discovery of something known as glymphatic drainage with a G versus lymphatic drainage with an L. Glymphatic drainage is this almost super soaking of the brain to cleanse it each evening. And so what that looks like is the brain actually shrinks in size while we're sleeping the first half of our night largely. So going through more of our deep sleep cycles. And so in that shrinking of the brain, then we're having this fluid being able to pass through and help wipe out some of that accumulated waste product throughout the course of your day. We're building this up and it needs to be flushed out. But it turns out things like eating, simply as, just banal as that, it can impede our ability to go through some of those stages in the same way. And if you think about it logically, it makes sense. So, because eating is a taxing process. You have to send all this blood flow to the stomach. It's like almost giving your body extra homework at night. And instead of now being able to focus on particularly the brain cleansing process, among other restorative processes, it is now having to splinter its efforts to now deal with digestion, like just for fun, on top of all the other things it's got to do. That can affect our ability to have that brain cleansing process, among other things. That brain cleansing process has gotten a lot of press because it appears that this could be a way to help set us up powerfully to minimize some of our chances of developing things like neurodegenerative disorders, dementia, Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, and beyond.
Wow.
So if that is the case, if these correlations are true, what it looks like is then by not being able to wash out that brain buildup, which looks like amyloid beta, and these plaques seem to get more cemented, and difficulty of bringing these out, cleansing this thereafter. So we're kind of creating this environment that can create some of those problems down the road. But even on the shorthand, that can look like, kind of brain fog, not being able to show up in your best way possible on the short side of things. But on the long term, some of those real concerns, it's actually helping you to be able to have a say in what the future of your health looks like.
Wow. That is, I'm just sitting here, trying to picture all of the bad being flushed out. And it makes so much sense that if all of that stuff doesn't get a chance to flush out, maybe that is the cause for all of, those diseases and, neurological disorders. That's kind of mind blowing. No pun intended. Sorry.
Yeah, right. Exactly.
But literally, right? It's just like, wow. And I just, it's like every time I talk to you, I'm like so fascinated. And I know it's been like a long time, but there's so much information. I think that it's so important that we're probably not going to do a lot of the business stuff here because I think this is so important to get out there. And we could touch on some of it, but I just think that people, especially let's say entrepreneurs, right?
Yeah.
They work their asses off. So I belong to a group called the Dames and we were up in, it's an amazing group. We'll talk about it because I think,
thanks.
Yeah. So, but I was at one of their events this summer and one of the women there, and our purpose is to not, to be entrepreneurs and not work 1,000 hours a week, right? The whole idea is to build our business to the point that we can work 40 hours a week or maybe less and get the stuff done. And this woman was sitting there and she was talking about how she was so excited to have her own business and she loves working all hours of the night. And I was like, no. And she kind of looked at me and I said, I mean, in the beginning, I get it, but you shouldn't be in business to work more and sleep less.
Right.
And she kind of looked at me because in my own way, I talk to people about sleep, because of you, and how important it is, right? I mean, it's true. And it's like, for me, if I don't get 8 hours sleep, I'm shit the next day.
Yeah.
And it could be 7, I think some nights it's 6.5 and I'm okay. But if I get less, which I used to get 4 hours sleep a night, right? If I get less than 6 hours sleep, I am like zero good.
Yeah.
And to tell people, hey, you have to get more than 2 hours sleep a night. You may think that you're rocking and rolling, you're going to crash and burn.
Yeah. Absolutely.
And as entrepreneurs, you need to really kind of, give yourself that time. Don't work through all hours of the night. Stop yourself, set your boundaries. Yeah. I mean, that's
totally. I did the same thing when part of the origin story for me, when I went through that period of insomnia, was a lot of justifications and rationalizations. And I would say, well, I make my own hours. So what's the big deal? I can sleep in a little bit later. I can have a longer nap. What's the problem? Having no awareness. And this is part of why I am committed to get this message out, is I think we're only just beginning to understand more about the importance of these rhythms. And I mean, we just in 2017, the Nobel Prize was given around circadian rhythms and understanding, their ripple effect throughout our body. And so we're just starting to kind of peel back the layers on this element. And yet one of the cool things from an entrepreneurial perspective is, I was just on a podcast before this, and we were talking about how it's both this blessing and a curse, if you will, because often it allows for this kind of self-creation of your schedule, which can seem great on the surface, but then on the practicality of it, one of the things that often occurs, and many of my clients are entrepreneurial in nature, can make their own hours, and that can often create its own problems because we see that sleep loves consistency. And if as entrepreneurs, kind of the buck stops here, if you will, or, so it's all on our shoulders. So what happens often during those times is, well, we work later and we take less time off, and then we have harder time falling asleep because now we don't have enough runway of kind of a down regulation time in the evening, and then things get pushed out, and then that consistency goes out the window. Yeah. So what is available to us is to start to see how can we align ourselves a bit more with this rhythm of nature as a blueprint to help override some of those kind of poor choices, honestly, that we might make at certain points. And not to say that there's not times in every person's business where you might, do a little bit more at certain stretches of time. Of course, there's going to be practical applications. But if by and large, we've been stealing from kind of our sleep capital, if you will, for too long of a stretch of time, where it's very clear that this can impact some of our thought processes into the subsequent and can subsequently impact our business negatively. So by using the blueprint of these rhythms of nature, this helps automate things. So I really work with people often to create kind of this day mode and night mode, and day mode being the time by which we're really all hands on deck. We're, doing all the work that we got to do, having some of the hard conversations that we got to have, all the stressful things that might pop up, having the courage to handle those swiftly in the first half of our day when the sun is out. And then when the sun is setting, then we're starting to train ourselves to begin the wind down process to move over to down regulatory activities, and actually using that to guide us to say, all right, well, this is just as important of a stretch of time to be productive on subsequent days. The same way athletes are so great with prioritizing recovery days. They've often been the leaders in different recovery techniques. They're the ones that get the sauna, the cold plunge, the Normatec, boots, the whole thing. They know some of these things that can make a difference because they know that will allow them to perform at a high level the next day. We want to bring in some element of that the same way every single evening of our days, and structure it in a way that aligns with these rhythms. Part of the problem that we're finding is that now the average person is spending over 90% of their days indoors. So how would you be connected to those rhythms if you're not even seeing any of that? I mean, I lived in New York City and Vegas, two spots where you could hypothetically live 24 hours, not even seeing the sun ever or darkness or whatever. You could just have lights all the time, any time of day, night, create your own schedule. Which we do know is really measurably impacts our health and well-being. Part of the reason we know that is for shift workers that are doing nothing more than being active when we're supposed to be asleep. So as diurnal creatures, which is what all human beings are, it means that we're meant to be active by day and at rest at night. Now, I did the exact opposite of that. I would call myself an extreme night owl. I would say, oh no, I'm most creative at night. This is my best time to work. And I'm not saying that there's not some, what we're kind of calling genetic drift, or a drift of some people that just tend to be a little bit earlier. Some people tend to be a little bit later. But one of the things we're seeing is that that kind of drift, quote unquote, has now become much more egregiously large. And now we're seeing people find it to be totally normal to be wine and popcorn at 1 a.m. with Netflix. But if you think of our ancestors, that would be extremely weird behavior to be roaming around the tribe at 1 a.m., just, being awake and alert, when that would have never happened in nature for thousands of years.
Yeah. And they didn't have wine and popcorn back then.
They didn't have wine and popcorn.
But so smart ass. But in Vegas, right? And I guess Manhattan, I think of could your clock change? Because if you're in the light all night long, and if you're inside all day long, could that reverse it?
Yes. And we see that for shift workers. So if you are a shift worker, if you know a shift worker, this becomes even more crucial for them to get aware of some of these, or to get curious about how they can really manage their own circadian rhythm, because now they're going to have to faux create their circadian rhythm, but there are still negative effects that can come about from that. Why? Because natural light is... we can think of light dark as a drug. And so light will have very drug-like effects, measurable effects, phototherapy, and things that will be excitatory at different parts throughout the light cycle. And a down-regulatory elements come about in the evening when the sun has set. But there's a difference between the type of light that you're getting under the sun than faux light indoors. So part of the one problem is that if we're never seeing the outside, my husband and I watched some of these HBO shows. There's one, Silo, where they're indoors, for hundreds of years or whatever, these sci-fi things. And no one much talks about, I want some sort of Silo breakdown or some of these things in, the where they're shuttling through space, and now they're just exposed to the same sort of static type of lighting. This would be a big problem for our health and well-being. One, because light needs to be dynamic in the same ways that it happens outside. So your morning light is very different from your solar noon light, very different from then your sunset light. And it tells the body something about what's going on, and that is not present indoors. The other problem about indoor lighting is that on average, it's usually around less than 1,000 lux on average indoors. So often say like 500 lux, 800 lux. That's a big problem because outside light can get as bright as 100,000 lux. So we're talking that this discrepancy in the brightness of the light is really impacting, one, how alert and awake we are by day, but it's also impacting how sleepy we're getting in the evening, because on average now we're 100 times too bright at night. So we flip-flop everything. So that's where we're dealing with some of the problems of this faux creative reality where we're indoors all the time.
I remember that when I was working with you, you said how I'm gonna see. Speaking of that, I'm gonna get
that light in there.
I always make sure but we bought this house because of the backyard, and I knew that I could have these 2 windows in my office. Like that was like really important to me. Yeah.
Oh, amazing.
I told you changed my life. But what I remember, one of the things was at night, you were like, it has to be as dark as possible because your body it knows if there's light in the room. And I remember like trying to jump through hoops to figure out how the hell do we cover like everything to make sure there's like no. So we were covering the alarm clock, like we were doing like all the things, to just make it as dark as possible in the room. And that did make a difference.
So great. Yeah. It's shocking.
Like it did. I noticed now because we have, the 2 dogs, we have a new house and we have the 2 dogs and light automatically comes in. And I have these like blackout curtains that I'll pull, and then the dogs will get up in the middle of the night and they'll move it. And most nights I sleep through, but if the bright street light comes in and it hits me, I freaking wake up.
Oh, totally.
I'm going to have to get up and close, which it's like, I think of everything that you ever told me and how everything affects everything. So what were you doing before this? I know you're a nomad and you were like going everywhere. Like the audience doesn't know that, but did you like have a job, or were you always entrepreneurial?
Yeah. So in my 20s, I had been working in much more corporate, traditional lifestyle, and then had left for this entrepreneurial venture. Let's see, that was at around 26 or so. And I had a lot of entrepreneurial things that I did. So one, I had something called Lecture Loft in New York. So I had a loft space in Manhattan. So I'd have different live events come. And so we would help facilitate those. I had the beginnings of a gratitude app. So one thing that I've done for consistently the longest streak effect of things that I've done is something of a gratitude email kind of chain that I kept going for 2,500 days.
I miss mine, by the way.
Yes, I know.
I'm not on it anymore.
It's done. I know. I completed it after 2,500 days. And so what was so interesting about that was just this, the social component, because knowing that if people are on there, that now I've been having this streak and the numbered effect and what have you. So anyway, I had the beginnings of an app for that. And so I did these different ventures, and I was also working with the nonverbal group. So my husband has something called the nonverbal group. He's a psychology professor out of CUNY, background in forensics, and how to read people. So it's all under the umbrella of human behavior, and all these things were under the umbrella of human behavior. And still really what I do with sleep is, because all this stuff is nice to know, but if we're not actually bringing it into our lifestyle, then it doesn't matter. So
Blake was traveling with you and all that stuff was happening, right?
Totally. Yeah.
So he was,
witnessing all of this, and this was, during a really stressful period of time for us. Like I was a part of, he had something called, which he now calls Beyond Tells, which is the result of the largest study ever conducted on poker players. So we had poker players coming into our space in New York with hundreds of poker players, and covered in cameras and wearable tech before wearable tech was much of a thing. And so these are like medical grade. And so it would track stress response while they were playing at the table, counting every blink rate to see kind of changes in, their stress load and what that all looked like. So what resulted was now one of the online products, it's a training program around how to spot tells at the poker table. But during that stretch, when we were doing that, that was self-funded, super stressful, tons of data, terabytes upon terabytes of footage and things to kind of sift through. And that was a big, big stressor. And so all those things, then that was on the heels of what happened for me, was the sleep result of just like, oh my God, we're in over our heads. We are so like, this is too much. And the entrepreneurial throes, which thankfully on the other side got to have, workability with that. And now that's, tons of people have gone through those trainings. And then what was great though, is I was able to later now pull some of those components that had been useful for training for human behavior with the nonverbal group Beyond Tells, and then apply that to sleep. So that was really a blessing, because then I could pull some of those same distinctions to make this more workable for people, so that they could actually, hopefully, quote unquote, have fun with bringing these things into their lives over time. And I find the tracking being a really important component of that, because it keeps them in the game, to see how they're performing, and then hopefully get curious to see what are some other ways that they can impact the data.
Wow. That is so they can track tells.
Yeah, so the spotting the tells now, of course, now this is for live games. So for online players, a little different, but for live poker, this allows to bring in other components beyond the math of poker. And, of course, still those pieces are important. This is another reason why so many of the clients that I work with are in poker. It's poker players are looking to get any sort of edge that they possibly can at the table. And sleep turns out to be a really important edge that many of the players that are there might not have the same awareness of things that they can do, especially when they've got such variable schedules, particularly for things like tournament players and certainly still cash game players. But they will have often kind of, if you will, rotating shifts where it's up and down. And so one night they're done at 4, one night they're done at 2, whatever, all of this. And so that can really spell for difficulty with their sleep. And if we know that sleep and emotional regulation are so interconnected, this is a big deal, because poker is all about how to have measured, thoughtful responses quickly over long stretches of time. So often they might be at the table for hours and hours and hours, like, a chess game or something, just you're going forever. And so to be able to be cognitively intact for long stretches of time gives you a huge edge over your opponents.
Wow. That's okay. Anybody who plays poker out there listening, there you go.
And even if you don't play poker, we see this all the time. And you mentioned, just driving. That's like an error rate that you want to be aware of. Your response, your quick responsiveness. On your job, so you're not making tons of mistakes all the time, so that you're not falling asleep at the keyboard, if you will. Heather used to
wake up. It was so funny. It wasn't funny. I would work throughout the night. And a couple of nights, she woke up and I was still at the computer, and she's like, "When did you get up?" And I was like, "Oh shit, I haven't slept yet." And then there were other times where, she would come in and I was like sleeping on the keyboard.
Yeah.
And she'd be like, "Oh my God, what is wrong with you?" And so she made me, you need to be in bed 11 o'clock the latest. And I'd be like, okay. Yeah. And I started getting better. So instead of like 5:30, it would be like 1.
Yeah.
and I started like trying to get myself better, but when COVID hit and like a few months before that, I just hadn't been, actually it was like 2 years, I think. I just couldn't sleep throughout the night. There was a lot of stuff going on.
Yep.
I also had a little bit of an online gambling thing. So I was up playing, but it was a stupid game that I made no money on. There was no return. I was just spending money and playing this game. And, so I'd be up in bed until I would fall asleep because, watching things turn. So anyway, but when we, again, when we started working together, and I can't stress enough how meeting with you and going over all the numbers was like, I was so excited about that because, I would look at my app and be like, oh, this is going to be such an awesome meeting. Or it would be like, oh, this is not going to be good. This is going to be like, I'm going to need to fix some things, because I knew just by looking at the app. So,
totally.
So what, gosh, I guess I'll go to the obstacle question. So, I know you've hit obstacles, right? And I have this new thing where, for me, it's like we all have obstacles in life and they can be stopping stones or stepping stones.
Yeah.
So for me, they're always stepping stones. Like I don't see stopping stones anymore. Like I used to, stop, but if you stop, then you don't continue going forward. So what's an obstacle that you've gotten over in your business that somebody who's listening now, who's, a seasoned entrepreneur or C-suite or, a very accomplished person might be going through that you've come through the other end of?
Yeah. I would say producing over consumption. So meaning that I am a personality, some of my default go-to ways of being often have me loving to research, to learn, to read, to take a class, to listen to a podcast, to this and that. And those are all great and helpful and crucial and important. And yet I can very easily, I've seen myself tip the scales into just hanging out there. I could happily hang out there till the end of days, I would think. And yet I would be stealing and robbing myself and others of the impact of creation. So meaning that by consuming and having a lifestyle where that's kind of all I'm doing, or that's the biggest ratio of time spent, then I'm not then putting that learning into action. And so there eventually hit a point with my business where it was like, okay, yes, I can continue to improve upon and learn and what have you, but I'm going to prioritize the creation part, the kind of putting pen to paper around what are these things that can make a difference for the individual. And, kind of getting out there and getting messy, and then also bringing these things into practice and then seeing, from a kind of practical application, what is making the difference. That's been one of the great things with having now so many people on our dashboard that have that use the Aura Rake. So we've been able to see for many, many years what makes the difference over the largest swath of people. And so that gathering process and being able to have people test those things came from getting outside of the continued learning trap that I think I could have easily stayed in, and I still have to monitor myself. Like, I just got a sleep textbook the other day that's like a brand new one around to the latest and greatest in mitochondrial health and circadian entrainment. And for me, it's like, woo, oh, so exciting, like ridiculous. And so really, really nerdy, really lame. But I say
it's
that
what you do. I mean, it's what you do. So why wouldn't you be excited about that?
Yeah. And it's one of the people, a thinker that I really respect, had been a part of the creation of this one. And, so I could hang out there. And so I think part of it has been the importance of seeing some of those tendencies. And for some other people, they might be the other, tip the scales a bit too much the other side. Maybe they're action takers, go, go, go. And maybe there's not enough pausing and reflecting and continued education. So it depends, of course, for the listener, but seeing for ourselves, what are some of our what are our ways of hiding out? And that's kind of a way of hiding out for me, is just to keep, I got to get better. I got to get better. And that can be, a trick on our psyche.
Right. Wow. And I think we're all, at some point wanting to, go more and push more and, and do more. And I was talking to my friend Brooke today, who she owns a dance studio in town.
Nice.
And they're going to be celebrating 10 years. I know she's phenomenal. And now she's doing coaching for dance studios. So she'll be on and probably like next year, but, and we were talking today and she said, I love talking to somebody like you because we get it. Like other people don't understand, like, why would we want to do another thing? And it's not that we want to we just want to keep adding stuff to our plate. I think it's that, like with my business is doing amazing. Now I'm doing speaking. Now this is on Apple TV, because by the time, this goes on, we're going to be on Apple TV. So you're on Apple TV, but it's right. But it's like, why limit ourselves? I think that we can stretch ourselves, and it doesn't necessarily mean that we have to push ourselves by stretching ourselves, right? We just kind of like expand a little bit, because for me, it was like, oh my God, how am I going to balance on these things? I'm on like, 3 boards. So I did drop off 1 board because it was just like, at some point you have to just say, okay, I'm in a band again. So that takes priority for me, right? For me, it's like, I love my music. And, the last band that I was with ended because, there were differences. We'll just put it that way.
Yeah.
And that was 5 years ago. So I hadn't played music for 5 years. So it was like before COVID, right? It ended.
Yep.
And so during COVID, and then I got this like karaoke program on my computer so that I could at least still sing. The dogs, I have a video of trying to get, Skylar would sing with me, and then I would put the camera on her and she'd leave the room. It was like, is it the singing or you don't like the camera? But, but to be able to be doing all of these things. And I was talking to somebody today and they're like, oh my God, you're like always going. And I said, yeah, but I'm pacing it. Whereas before I didn't. Before I would do the thing and do the thing and do, the next thing. And I would be so overwhelmed that I started not doing all the things well.
Sure.
Totally. So now it's like I do all the things and I do all the things well, because I've allowed myself the time to be able to do it. And, I get home from rehearsal, instead of getting home at 11, 12 o'clock at night, I get home by 8:30, 9 o'clock.
Amazing.
And it's great. And then I wind down for a half hour and I'm in bed, by 10, which, is, we put ourselves on a clock that during the week, the latest we go to bed is 10. And before it used to be midnight.
Sure.
And during the weekend, I think the latest we get in bed is like maybe 12. Cool. And which for us was huge, because, and I'll get up. I have to get up now because I have to take medication every morning because of the condition. But, but I wake up and it's like, okay, I'm up. Now where she used to sleep in, because remember she would sleep in until like, 5 o'clock, whatever. She still takes her nap on Saturday. She'll never stop that. Yeah. But she gets up now. And so she gets up, she feeds the dog. She's up for a few hours before she takes her nap.
Takes a little nap. Yeah.
But that's like her thing. And I told her, because I tried getting her to work with you for forever, but I think that for her, she won't, because it will literally change how she sleeps and how she naps and how she works during the week. And so you have to be, I think the point there is that you have to be willing to do the work and do it at the time that you need to do it.
Yeah, no, I think that's a big deal. Like somewhere along the lines you'd mentioned too, like this being a real lifestyle change. And I think that is absolutely so true and so well
Yeah.
said because so often people will come our way and one of the first things that they want to hear about is the supplements, the gadgets, the what have you. And those things are all great. And yet, often some of the things that make the biggest difference are these, less sexy things, the consistency, the consistent, discipline to have that kind of bedtime awareness, that wake up time consistency, the kind of awareness around, like you're saying too, like the naps or what have you, all
Right.
of those things. They work in tandem and they have to be a part of the conversation to really get lasting results. But on the other side of it, I think there's what you get to experience is such a kind of uncommon phenomenon of truly feeling well, feeling rested with your day, which is becoming increasingly more and more rare as we see this epidemic of sleep disturbances.
Yeah.
It's if you can train yourself to have that sort of reality, you're already having this unfair advantage truly against so many other individuals because sadly they don't know. They were like, those of, what we used to know about, we thought we knew about sleep, turned out there was a whole lot more that there was available for us to know about. And yet it does take a bit of that education simply because our modern society is so divorced from the things that help facilitate automaticity with our sleep wake. Because we used to have a lot of this handled just by living outside. And yet, because we've come indoors, we have a bit of a comfort crisis of a consistent, all year long, 72-degree indoor temperature reality. We have an indoor crisis of this kind of perfect lighting opportunity. We have an indoor crisis of our plumbing with the warm, nice water, and that's all wonderful. And yet there are trade-offs of those things. So we're no longer being exposed to seasonal shifts that would have helped do a lot for our bodies in this much more longer of a conversation and what that does for mitochondrial health and kind of telling the body things about different behaviors that we would have had in the winters versus the summers. And there's a lot to this that can get more layered and interesting. But the big part of it is because we've gone indoors, it requires now sort of a re-education around what does actual natural kind of sleep look like.
Right. Right. And I'm one of those, we have the thermostat at 72. At night, we do have it down to 70.
Okay. All right.
Because of you. I mean,
Love it.
think I had it I think you were like 68 and I was like, I can't do 68. So I did like 69 and I was like, okay, I'll keep it at 70.
Yes.
But, I really don't go out that much. So, and I have a heated jacket and I have heated socks. Well, I have to have heated socks because of my feet, but, as I'm talking to you, I'm realizing I need to kind of pony up and stop being a baby about it and just, suck it up and let myself be cold, warm with the coat, but still, out in the cold so that my face is hitting.
Oh, totally. There's benefits. I mean, and so this gets longer, but just even to be aware that purely one thing that is most people don't know is that your mitochondria also produces melatonin. We used to think it was more just a brain-based phenomenon. And yet the mitochondria producing melatonin is a big deal because for so many of us we can have this dysfunctional melatonin, or dysfunctional, certainly melatonin, but also mitochondria. And what are some of the ways to boost mitochondria? One is to get outside. Two is to be exposed to cold for certain stretches of time that can boost mitochondrial function. It's one of the reasons we see people doing these cold plunges and some of these things that can help support mitochondrial functionality. And if that is working, then that can also help produce that melatonin that we're looking to achieve in the evening. So it's all of these interconnected things that kind of worked beautifully in the past when we were outside, but now we've gone indoors and, we have kind of the recency effect going on because we think, well, it's always been like this. So for us, it's the recent reality is one of being indoors under faux lights, faux ability to change our temperature, plumbing, all these things. But it's only been, the recent part of mankind that we've had this sort of comfort. Previously, it didn't look anything like this. So, we think that this is how it is, but it really isn't. This is a new thing.
So I love we could talk about this for hours, and I know we can't, at least not now. But,
yes.
but I know that there are other people out there that may tackle, sleep. Why you? Why would they want to work with you? I mean, I know why they would want to work with you, but in your words, like what's your differentiator?
Yeah, great question. So part of it goes to what I think some of what we touched on around the behavioral components, because one of the things that you might be able to find at this point, you can chat GPT a lot of these things. So you can chat GPT, and I encourage you to do this actually. So chat GPT or Google or what have you around what does kind of a healthy sleep-wake cycle look like as far as when we're talking about the circadian rhythm entrainment, chronobiology, some of these things that can really help support great sleep. You can do all those things. And yet one of the things that is really important is bringing it into your life and having this be kind of gamified, having the benefit of what's known as kind of the Hawthorne effect, the observer effect. So actually the phenomenon by which we tend to act differently when we know we're being watched to a certain component of, and that can be right down to simply like our wearables, but also knowing that we've got kind of a partner in crime on these things that we're changing. So one of the things that's really unique about what we do is that we do have such the tracking component enmeshed in what we bring people through this kind of journey of circadian rhythm entrainment. Because a couple of things I'll say is that some of my concerns are as follows, that in the United States, first off, there's only around 7,000 sleep practitioners for millions of people. So we already got a deficit of minds on this topic of sleep. And so you're already kind of on a massive wait list to be able to access some of these people that are, devoting their lives to sleep. Further, some of the concerns that I have are that, and I certainly have many people come my way that have been to their sleep doctor, to CBTI practitioners, what have you, and they're still not sleeping. So one thing that we see very often is about 2 go-to responses for sleep when people are struggling. It's CBTI, which I mentioned to you, and then it's also a sleep study. So seeing if you have sleep apnea or one of the many other sleep disorders, which is crucial. Both are really, really great steps. But sadly, for many practitioners, it kind of ends there. And then if you're not addressed your concern with the CBTI, or if you don't have a sleep disorder, or even if you do have a sleep disorder and now you got to embark on how to treat that, which can take a lot of, trial and error often, then you might be left with kind of, well, good luck. Or sadly, if then those 2 aren't working, then you might be in the sleeping pill conversation, which I have a lot of concerns about, because we know a lot of that can be really, really damaging to your health and well-being. Now, of course, there's case-by-case situations, and, certainly don't want to broad stroke that conversation, but certainly we do know with things like benzodiazepines that there's very clear sounding alarms going off for long-term use of benzos for sleep. And then even that's starting to extend to things like Z drugs, so the Ambiens, Lunestas, et cetera. So if those are the main toolkits of the average practitioner, then if those don't work for you, you're just left to your own, devices. Whereas one of the things that we see is that I think, one, the circadian rhythm entrainment piece is a missing blueprint to orient all of those things. And the biological piece. So if you're dealing with, this isn't accounting for mold in your environment, isn't accounting for hormonal shifts that particularly women are going to be experiencing at different points throughout their life. It isn't accounting for heavy metals. It isn't accounting for some of these things that can occur that are outside of the scope of maybe more allopathic approach to sleep.
Wow. Well, that's a hell of a differentiator. So,
well, the thing is too, and I think it's a systemic problem, because one stat that I mention all the time is that even out of Harvard Medical, the average primary care doctor is going to have about 2 hours of training in sleep for this thing we do. Around 26 years of our life, a third of our life spent sleeping. And yet the, kind of gatekeeper to getting you to other, doctors and hopefully funneling you to the right places, sadly doesn't have that training. So it's not like they're being malicious and keeping you from these practices. They just don't necessarily know. They don't know. So they don't know the red flags. And they don't know that, if you're dealing with teeth grinding and morning headaches and certain signs that we might want to get them a sleep study. They sound like they might have sleep apnea or what have you. That's just totally getting missed. We're dealing with a number of problems, but on the bright side, we're getting this conversation going thanks to people like you that are creating these forums to be able to talk about these things. It can really help illuminate this problem.
Yeah. And it's important for entrepreneurs because like we said, they, work themselves to the bone, right? Where it's just like hours upon hours and, you work through the night and you don't need to do that. I mean, when we first start our business, I know we're like, oh my God, I have to work. I can't stop working. I have to do all the things. And, we can get to the point that, which is what I did. It's just kind of like, we're just exhausted. This is so important. This is just so crazy important. So, where can people find you?
Yes. So sleepisaskill.com can act as kind of a bucket for a lot of things. So one, you can take a free sleep assessment to get immediately back kind of targeted things that you can do based on exactly what you're dealing with around your sleep and what you're struggling with. And then we also have in that process, we can get you a free downloadable PDF, a sleep assessment, you get that sleep assessment, but it's also with that downloadable PDF, it's the optimized bedroom. So that has 18 strategic, high-tech, low-tech things that you can do to improve your bedroom environment. And then we also have something that I am very passionate about. Every Monday, we've been sending our Sleep Obsessions newsletter for over 5 years. So that has been a great place to kind of connect further with other individuals looking to improve their sleep. So we put in lots of kind of free things like the latest sleep studies, articles, but also screenshots of, different improvements that people are making in their sleep, et cetera. So it can be a great place to kind of improve upon your sleep for free. We have our weekly podcast with different sleep experts, and we're getting out more solo casts too to kind of disseminate some of this information as well. And then if you're also, looking to dive in more deeply, then we have different programs. So we have 8-week-long cohorts. We have one starting up in the new year, new you, and take on your sleep. And so that is required to wear the Oura Ring to participate in that. So we can really see measurably, like, where do we start? Where did we leave? And really get those tools in working in your life. And then if you want more kind of one-on-one support, then we do have longer programs that are, 3 months, 6 months that we can help facilitate some real lasting change for people. And if you just want a one-off, we have different sleep wearable audits. So we do audits of Oura Rings and Whoop Band in particular. And so then we can go over your sleep results and then have a tailored kind of plan of action for the next 90 days for you.
Right. Yeah. And I will tell you, I did the 6-month one, I think, and it was, it's life-changing. It truly is. So
happy to hear that. Amazing. Well, thanks for spreading the good word about the difference that sleep can make.
Yeah. I mean, it changes the way you live your life. It really does. It's a lifestyle change.
Absolutely.
So I can't believe we're here already. But the last question that I ask all my guests is, what lights your fire?
Oh, so what lights my fire? I'll pull out part of that word is light. I am obsessed with light. I'm obsessed with the fact that light dark is a drug. I said it before and I'll say it again, because I don't think many of us get that we can set up our environment to facilitate how we feel, and that light is the access point to that. And I really believe that sleep begins with light. It's a story of light. And I moved to Austin partly because of the light. Like, health geography is real. Where you live, results in certain behaviors and truly what your health is going to look like. And we know that through many different types of, disorders. MS is a great example. If you're in northern latitude locations, we have a greater percentage of MS people dealing with MS versus if you're in a southern latitude location. So and there's more to that. That's a much longer topic, but the light component is a big, big deal. And so wherever you are on the globe, starting to get curious about your light environment is going to give you a whole new set of tools that most people don't realize is available to them.
Right. Well, let's have you on again for sure. So we can get into more of this. I'm going to say goodbye to the audience. I'll be right back. Don't go anywhere.
Beautiful.
Everybody, thank you so much for hanging in. I know this was a little bit longer than usual, but I really felt that this was super important, that you really got an understanding of how sleep affects us. And as entrepreneurs, I really feel that it's a very valuable tool. And I encourage you, reach out to Mollie. She's phenomenal. She literally changed my life with my sleeping and with my functionality and all that. So thank you so much for hanging in. If you gleaned any nuggets, which I really hope you did from this one, please share, like, download, and really pay attention to your sleep, stay healthy. And I appreciate you all. I love you all. And until next time, go out and find what lights your fire. See ya.